Section 3 of As a Matter of Course. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Cinda J. M. As a Matter of Course by Annie Payson Call. Chapter 4. Brain Impressions. The mere idea of a brain clear from false impressions gives a sense of freedom which is refreshing. In a comic journal some years ago, there was a picture of a man in a most self-important attitude, with two common mortals in the background gazing at him. "What makes him stand like that?" said one. "Because," answered the other, "that is his own idea of himself." The truth suggested in that picture strikes one aghast, for in looking about us we see constant examples of attitudinizing in one's own idea of oneself. There is sometimes a feeling of fright as to whether I am not quite as abnormal in my idea of myself as are those about me. If one could only get the relief of acknowledging ignorance of oneself, light would be welcome, however given. In seeing the truth of an unkind criticism, one could forget to resent the spirit, and what an amount of nerve friction might be saved. Imagine the surprise of a man who, in return for a volley of abuse, should receive thanks for light thrown upon a false attitude. Whatever we are enabled to see relieves us of one mistaken brain impression, which we can replace by something more agreeable. And if, in the excitement of feeling, the mistake was exaggerated, what is that to us? All we wanted was to see it in quality. As to degree, that lessens in proportion as the quality is bettered. Fortunately, in living our own idea of ourselves, it is only ourselves we deceive, with possible exceptions in the case of friends who are so used to us or so overfond of us as to lose the perspective. There is the idea of humility, an obstinate belief that we know we are nothing at all and deserve no credit, which, literally translated, means we know we are everything and deserve every credit. There is the idea, too, of immense dignity, of freedom from all self-seeking and from all vanity. But it is idle to attempt to catalogue these various forms of private theatricals. They are constantly to be seen about us. It is with surprise unbounded that one hears another calmly assert that he is so-and-so or so-and-so, and in his next action or next 100 actions sees that same assertion entirely contradicted. Daily familiarity with the manifestations of mistaken brain impressions does not lessen one's surprise at this curious personal contradiction. It gives one an increasing desire to look to oneself and see how far these private theatricals extend in one's own case, and to throw off the disguise as far as it is seen, with a full acknowledgment that there may be, probably is, an abundance more of which to rid oneself in future. There are many ways in which true openness in life, one with another, would be of immense service, and not the least of these is the ability gained to erase false brain impressions. The self-condemnatory brain impression is quite as pernicious as its opposite. Singularly enough, it goes with it. One often finds inordinate self-esteem combined with the most abject condemnation of self. One can be played against the other as a counter-irritant, but this only as a process of rousing, for the irritation of either brings equal misery. I am not even sure that as a rousing process it is ever really useful. To be clear of a mistaken brain impression, a man must recognize it himself, and this recognition can never be brought about by an unasked attempt of help from another. It is often cleared by help asked and given, and perhaps more often by help which is quite involuntary and unconscious. One of the greatest points in friendly diplomacy is to be open and absolutely frank so far as we are asked, but never to go beyond. At least in the experience of many, that leads more surely to the point where no diplomacy is needed, which is certainly the point to be aimed at in friendship. It is trying to see a friend living his own idea of himself, and to be obliged to wait until he has discovered that he is only playing a part. But this very waiting may be of immense assistance in reducing our own moral attitudinizing. How often do we hear others or find ourselves complaining of a fault over and over again? I know that this is a fault of mine, and it has been for years. I wish I could get over it. I know this is a fault of mine. One brain impression. It has been for years. A dozen or more brain impressions, according to the number of years, until we have drilled the impression of that fault in by emphasizing it over and over to an extent which daily increases the difficulty of dropping it. So, if we have the habit of unpunctuality and emphasize it by deploring it, it keeps us always behind time. If we are sharp-tongued and dwell with remorse on something said in the past, it increases the tendency in the future. The slavery to nerve habit is a well-known psychological fact, but nerve habit may be strengthened negatively as well as positively. When this is more widely recognized and the negative practice avoided, much will have been done towards freeing us from our subservience to mistaken brain impressions. Let us take an instance. Unpunctuality, for example, as that is a common form of repetition. If we really want to rid ourselves of the habit, suppose every time we are late we cease to deplore it. Make a vivid mental picture of ourselves as being on time at the next appointment. Then, with the how and the when clearly impressed upon our minds, there should be an absolute refusal to imagine ourselves anything but early. Surely, that would be quite as effective as a constant repetition of the regret we feel at being late, whether this is repeated aloud to others or only in our own minds. As we place the two processes side by side, the latter certainly has the advantage and might be tried until a better is found. Of course, we must beware of getting an impression of promptness which has no ground in reality. It is quite possible for an individual to be habitually and exasperatingly late, with all the air and innocence of unusual punctuality. It would strike us as absurd to see a man painting a house the color he did not like, and go on painting it the same color, to show others and himself that which he detested. Is it not equally absurd for any of us, through the constant expression of regret for a fault, to impress the tendency for it more and more upon the brain? It is intensely sad when the consciousness of evil once committed has so impressed a man with a sense of guilt as to make him steadily undervalue himself and his own powers. Here is a case where one's own idea of oneself is 75% below par, and a gentle and consistent encouragement in raising that idea is most necessary before par is reached. And par, as I understand it, is simple freedom from any fixed idea of oneself, either good or bad. If fixed impressions of oneself are stones in the way, the same certainly holds good with fixed impressions of others. Unpleasant brain impressions of others are great weights and greater impediments in the way of clearing our own brains. Suppose so-and-so had such a fault yesterday. It does not follow that he has not rid himself of at least part of it today. Why should we hold the brain impression of his mistake, so that every time we look at him we make it stronger? He is not the gainer thereby, and we certainly are the losers. Repeated brain impressions of another's fault prevent our discerning his virtues. We are constantly attributing to him disagreeable motives which arise solely from our idea of him, and of which he is quite innocent. Not only so, but our mistaken impressions increase his difficulty in rising to the best of himself. For anyone whose temperament is in the least sensitive is oppressed by what he feels to be another's idea of him until he learns to clear himself of that as well as of other brain impressions. It is not uncommon to hear one go over and over a supposed injury or even small annoyances from others with the reiterated assertion that he fervently desires to forget such injury or annoyances. This fervent desire to forgive and forget expresses itself by a repeated brain impression of that which is to be forgiven. And if this is so often repeated in words, how many times more must it be repeated mentally? Thus, the brain impression is increased until at last forgetting seems out of the question, and forgiving is impossible unless one can at the same time so entirely forget the ill feeling roused as to place it beyond recall. Surely, if we realize the force and influence of unpleasant brain impressions, it would be a simple matter to relax and let them escape, to be replaced by others that are only pleasant. It cannot be that we enjoy the discomfort of the disagreeable impressions. And yet, so curiously perverted is human nature that we often hear a revolting story told with a preface, "Oh, I can't bear to think of it." And the whole story is given with a careful attention to detail which is quite unnecessary, even if there were any reason for telling the story at all, and generally concluded with a repetition of the prefatory exclamation. How many pathetic sights are told of, to no end but the repetition of an unpleasant brain impression? How many past experiences, past illnesses are gone over and over, which serve the same worse than useless purpose, that of repeating and emphasizing the brain impression. A little pain is made a big one by persistent dwelling upon it. What might have been a short pain is sometimes lengthened for a lifetime. Similarly, an old pain is brought back by recalling a brain impression. The law of association is well known. We all know how familiar places and happenings will recall old feelings. We can realize this at any time by mentally reviving the association. By dwelling on the pain we had yesterday, we are encouraging it to return tomorrow. By emphasizing the impression of an annoyance of today, we are making it possible to suffer beyond expression from annoyances to come. And the annoyances, the pains, the disagreeable feelings will find their old brain grooves with remarkable rapidity when given the ghost of a chance. I have known more than one case where a woman kept herself ill by the constant repetition to others and to herself of a nervous shock. A woman who had once been frightened by burglars refused to sleep for fear of being awakened by more burglars, thus increasing her impression of fear. And of course, if she slept at all, she was liable at any time to wake with a nervous start. The process of working herself into nervous prostration through this constant, useless repetition was not slow. The fixed impressions of preconceived ideas in any direction are strangely in the way of real freedom. It is difficult to catch new harmonies with old ones ringing in our ears, still more difficult when we persist in listening at the same time to discords. The experience of arguing with another whose preconceived idea is so firmly fixed that the argument is nothing but a series of circles might be funny if it were not sad, and it often is funny in spite of the sadness. Suppose we should insist upon retaining an unpleasant brain impression only when and so long as it seemed necessary in order to bring a remedy. That accomplished, suppose we dropped it on the instant. Suppose further that we should continue this process and never allow ourselves to repeat a disagreeable brain impression aloud or mentally. Imagine the result. Nature abhors a vacuum. Something must come in place of the unpleasantness. Therefore, way is made for feelings more comfortable to oneself and to others. Bad feelings cause contraction, good ones expansion. Relax the muscular contraction, take a long free breath of fresh air, and expansion follows as a matter of course. Drop the brain contraction, take a good inhalation of whatever pleasant feeling is nearest, and the expansion is a necessary consequence. As we expand mentally, disagreeable brain impressions that in former contracted states were eclipsed by greater ones will be keenly felt, and dropped at once for the mere relief thus obtained. The healthier the brain, the more sensitive it is to false impressions, and the more easily are they dropped. One word by way of warning: we can never rid ourselves of an uncomfortable brain impression by saying, "I will try to think something pleasant of that disagreeable man." The temptation, too, is very common to say to ourselves clearly, "I will try to think of something pleasant," and then leave "of that disagreeable man" a subtle feeling in the background. The feeling in the background, however unconscious we may be of it, is a strong brain impression, all the stronger because we fail to recognize it, and the result of our something pleasant is an insidious complacency at our own magnanimous disposition. Thus we get the disagreeable brain impression of another, backed up by our agreeable brain impression of ourselves, both mistaken. Unless we keep a sharp lookout, we may here get into a snarl from which extraction is slow work. Neither is it possible to counteract an unpleasant brain impression by something pleasant but false. We must call a spade, but not consider it a component part of the man who handles it, nor yet associate the man with the spade, or the spade with the man. When we drop it, so long as we drop it for what it is worth, which is nothing in the case of the spade in question, we have dropped it entirely. If we try to improve our brain impression by insisting that a spade is something better and pleasanter, we are transforming a disagreeable impression to a mongrel state, which again brings anything but a happy result. Simply to refuse all unpleasant brain impressions with no effort or desire to recast them into something that they are not seems to be the only clear process to freedom. Not only so, but whatever there might have been pleasant in what seemed entirely unpleasant can more truly return as we drop the unpleasantness completely. It is a good thing that most of us can approach the freedom of such a change in imagination before we reach it in reality, so we can learn more rapidly not to hamper ourselves or others by retaining disagreeable brain impressions of the present or by recalling others of the past. End of section 3.